This is a wonderful age to be alive. I'm so glad I didn't miss it. I think sometimes if I had lived 100 years ago, I would have missed so many things that are now very commonplace. Of course, in that age, people who lived then also enjoyed living then. But in the area of health, which is my field, so much has been discovered just in the last 15 or 20 years that just almost puts you in a dizzy spell just to think of all that's being learned. How to plan a menu, how to get our meals together, all of this has come under a great deal of scrutiny in the last few years in university centers, and we'll be talking about some of these things in this program. We hope you'll be with us.
The following program presents principles designed to promote good health and is not intended to take the place of personalized professional care. The opinions and ideas expressed are those of the speaker. Viewers are encouraged to draw their own conclusions about the information presented. Welcome to Help Yourself to Health with Dr. Agatha Thrash of Uchee Pines Institute. And now, here's your host, Dr. Thrash.
Some work having been done in some of the big university centers will usually strike our fancy a lot better than something done in a very remote area such as Uchee Pines Institute. But even in rural Alabama where we live, there is much being learned about how we can fashion a diet that makes it so that we can be just right at the cutting edge of the research being done today. I have here an article that was published by some researchers from Harvard. And they found, this was published in 2004, and these researchers found a very simple thing, something that we had found at Uchee Pines fully 35 years ago, and that is fruit and vegetable intake will reduce your risk of chronic diseases. Oh, that's good news. But of course, if you follow the very best that we knew even then, even 35 years ago or 50 years ago, the best that we knew then was to emphasize fruits and vegetables in the diet. When I was a very little girl, my mother was always saying, eat your vegetables. Sometimes she would even say, you can't have this until you eat your greens. Well, that was not as difficult for me as it was for my little brother. He could not abide greens, and so he would choke them down so that he was enabled to eat something else. Now, today, he is able to tolerate greens just right along with the best of us. But let's say you are not the kind of person who understands that fruits and vegetables are important in your meals. Then what you need to do is to get on the internet and take a look at the research that's being done in various research centers. One of the things that you should consider in your menu planning is where you live. The closer the garden is to the table, the healthier the children will be. So if you have your own garden, if you live in a geographic area where it's possible for you to have a good garden, by all means do so. Gardens are one of the best things to make the diet healthy. So we hope that you will avail yourself of this good bit of research. Fruits and vegetables reduce the total amount of chronic disease that we have. Now, the next thing that I would like for us to talk about is what you do when you have to eat elsewhere than in your own kitchen at home. How do you handle that? And I have Dr. Don Miller here, who has been in that kind of situation, I guess, thousands of times, probably.
A lot of times.
And in fact, your experience in the Marine Corps probably led you to have a lot of meals that were taken away from home. What can you tell us about eating elsewhere?
Well, you know, you have to be careful sometimes. You have to be not only careful, but you got to be sensitive to other people. When I was in the Marine Corps, if I was going to be traveling in foreign lands, we'd always get a sheet, sometimes a little booklet from the protocol officer telling us how we are supposed to do certain things in certain countries. There are certain things that are absolutely taboo in other countries that we find perfectly normal. Which hand you reach for the food with, what you do at the end of a meal, how you eat your meal in the first place. You have to be sensitive. Years ago when I was a young man, I read a book called The Ugly American, and that has sort of put a stamp on my mind ever since. I don't remember much about the book, but the impression I got was Americans go to foreign countries and they talk loud and they flash money and they feel so superior. I try very much to get where the people are. Now this can be a real challenge sometimes, a fun challenge. Let's say like India. If you've ever been to India, you will find that for the most part they eat with their fingers, and which I did when I was 2 and 3, but I sort of got away from that into knives, forks, and spoons. And I could not master the art of taking rice and curry and eating it with just my hand. And you eat it with one hand. You don't put both hands in there and make a big ball of rice. It's a one-hand deal. The left hand you don't usually use for this process, it's your right hand. And I remember only one time did I get through a meal using just my right hand, and I made such a huge mess that I sort of went away from that technique. Now, eating there in that country, I remember one time I wanted to, I was going to make some type of a herbal preparation, and I wanted some cayenne pepper. And so I asked the houseboy where we were staying, I need to get some cayenne pepper. And he says, well, we don't have any cayenne pepper here. I says, well, you know, just red peppers. We don't have any red peppers here. And I remember looking out the window and seeing a bus go by with a great big bag of what I looked like cayenne pepper on top. And so I went out on the street and walked up the road, and you'll find in many of these countries the food is sold right out there. It's fully exposed to everything that can wander by. And here's this mountain of what I thought was cayenne pepper or red peppers. So I asked the man in my arm and hand signals for a little bit, and I ended up with 2 big bags of this stuff. Went back to our room, took one out, and took a bite and found out that it was indeed cayenne pepper, but they don't call it cayenne pepper. Those were chili peppers. And so you have to find out, to make sure you're calling the right thing by the right name. Growing up, we always had stuffed mangoes. My mother makes stuffed mangoes for our suppers. She was from New York, and up there, as far as I can understand, is what I grew up understanding, a mango was a green pepper. Then I went down to Florida and found out the mango was one of the most delicious fruits that there are. So learn what they're talking about when they have their food. Then we go down to Africa. Africans also, many of the places, especially out in the bush, eat with their hands. There, the main staple is shima, which is made out of mealie meal or cornmeal. And it's made into a very, very thick porridge to the point where it's almost congealed. And you'll get a large lump of this stuff, and then usually 2 small splatters of what they call a relish. Now, in this country, in America, we consider relish to be some pickles that are sort of sweetened or whatever, and you put it on something else. There, that's not what relish is. Their relish might be some simmered cabbage or some simmered eggplant, and then learning how to eat it properly. I had to ask my students, I say, how do you eat this thing? I didn't know how to eat. There was no knives and forks around. You tear off a piece of it, and you form it in one, it's an art. You form it in one hand, you stick your thumb in it, make a little indentation, and then you scoop up some relish in the middle, then you pop the whole thing in your mouth. I loved eating the food there in Africa, learning how to do it. But you have to also learn what is it that they are cooking with in this meal. Now, I found them to be great vegetarians. As a matter of fact, many countries I go to that are deprived countries, I don't know if there's really depriving that we can say, they are basically on a basic vegetarian dietary like that, and so I like eating in those countries. But you got to learn their customs to make sure that you don't do offensive things, but also make sure that you're getting things that aren't going to hurt you. You have to understand that if you're in a foreign country, you're not used to the bugs that may be inherent in their foods, and so you have to make sure that either it's been properly washed or properly cooked, that it's not going to give you some type of an agent that's going to give you either a short-time acute problem or a long-term chronic problem. And I've seen both of these things arise, and I've had a couple of the short-term acute problems with a bug that my body wasn't used to. But now we come right here to our country or to a Western country, and often we eat out. Well, there has to be some close considerations about what you're eating when you're eating out. You go to a salad bar, you say, well, they have a great salad bar, and the salad's been sitting there for 2 hours and it looks great. What did they do to that salad to keep it looking so fresh? There's often things that they add to the lettuce to keep it looking fresh. things that you do not want to put into your body. Going one step beyond there, who was in the back room and what's happening in the back room when they cut this food up? There's the problem, and it's a big problem, with cross-contamination. Someone's back there chopping up the chicken, and then they chop up the lettuce, and you get the lettuce, and you also get whatever organisms that were on the chicken. And so you want to make sure that wherever you're eating, as a matter of fact, I will sometimes ask ahead, what is this flavored with? If I go to an Oriental restaurant, and I love Oriental food, I spend a lot of time in the Orient, I'll ask them, how do you season your food? How are you flavoring your food? And often they flavor it with a lobster sauce or a crab powder, and you need to stay away from that. I found that to be a major problem in Bangkok. I could find a way around it, and they could prepare food. It's an interesting thing is, they will be willing to prepare it the way you want it, because most restaurants want to please you because they want your business. And so be upfront with them, be courteous, be kind with them, and say, look, I've got a real food situation here, can you help me? Now, there's another problem we run into when we're traveling in other countries. We go into somebody's home, and this happened to me a couple years ago in Ukraine. I had told, or the family had been told before time, that we were vegetarians, complete vegetarians, total vegetarians. And we come to the meal time. It was a Sabbath lunchtime, and there on the table was a great big platter of sandwiches. The sandwiches consisted of a slice of bread with butter on it, with a dead fish, and 2 slices of hard-boiled egg, and a whole platter of these things. What do? Do you, to keep from offending these people, go ahead and eat it? Or to keep from offending yourself, not eat it? What do? I find that if I've done due diligence, and this is what due diligence is, make sure that whoever's going to be your host or hostess knows where you stand on the dietary idiosyncrasies that you might have. I am a vegetarian. I cannot eat. And I don't say I don't like to, I won't. I say I cannot, because I really, for myself, consider that I cannot eat anything that comes from an animal, any type of an animal product. And if they know that ahead of time and it's still on the table, I will usually say, and as I did this time, I say, I'm sorry, it looks so good, but I just can't eat it. And you know, the lady says, oh, in Ukrainian to my translator, oh, no problem. Took that tray away, went back, and within 2 minutes she had a big tray of varenikis, potato varenikis on my table. Now, what happened there? Was this a test, or was this just a mistake? Sometimes it's a test. This person says this, but what are they going to do? So consider when you're with other people, am I being tested? We're always being tested in this life. And if we are faithful to God and faithful to ourselves and to our bodies, we're going to find that we're not going to run into these problems quite as much, Dr. Thrash. I think that's good advice.
Now, you said you're a total vegetarian.
Total vegetarian.
And you are strong?
I consider myself strong. I still run. I still lift weights.
Don't have any kind of disease?
I hope not. I haven't found any lately.
Are you weak and wobbly?
I'm not weak and wobbly. I'm pushing. I'll be 58 here pretty soon, and I think I'm doing pretty good for 58.
Well, actually, I have seen you out chopping wood for your wood heater, and I'm quite impressed with the fact that even being on a totally vegetarian menu, or cuisine, you can be so active and so strong in chopping that wood. Now, I'd like to mention just a few things having to do with the time of the year and what it has to do with the kind of diet that you have. In the summertime, you will notice that the garden produces a lot of succulent vegetables, and we have a lot of succulent fruits, and these can be very helpful to give us the extra fluids that we need during the summertime. But in the winter, our foods tend to be more dense in calories, such things as winter squash and potatoes, sweet potatoes and pumpkins. These come off in the winter time, and they are more calorie dense. So we do need things that are more calorie dense in the winter than we do in the summer. Iron needs should be considered when there are growing children in the family and women in the family under the age of 50, then you will need foods that are more iron high. But the men in the family do not need extra iron. In fact, iron overload is one of the big problems that we have in planning a menu these days. Iron overload can imbalance the calcium, so calcium goes down, that encourages osteoporosis, and zinc goes down, and that encourages various hormonal problems. And with the problems with iron, one of those is that it is an oxidant, which is the reverse of an antioxidant, which slows down the aging process. So an oxidant accelerates the aging process and makes a conversion of LDL to oxidized LDL, which is much more damaging to the arteries than just plain LDL. So that increases your problems with kidney, possibility of kidney failure, heart attacks, strokes, and hardening of the arteries. And of course, we want to try to avoid that if we can. Alzheimer's disease is also, or a type of dementia, is related to hardening of the arteries, and that can be a problem with iron overload as well. Interestingly, the eyes are a part of the target of iron overload, and the retina in particular, and macular degeneration is now the commonest cause of blindness in the Western world, even ahead of the diabetes that we have always understood to be a problem with blindness in this country. Now, some of the antioxidants, you may be interested in them. I'll just read a list of a few of these. The first is, of course, carotenoids. These are anything, any food, orange, bright yellow, deep green. Those are foods that are going to be high in carotenoids, and they are very high in antioxidants. Then ascorbic acid or vitamin C. Of course, everybody thinks of citrus, and that is true. It's high. Not as high as kiwi, and maybe not as high as tomatoes or potatoes even. And with the cooking of potatoes, 30% of the vitamin C or ascorbic acid in the potato is retained even with adequate cooking. But then some other vegetables that are high in vitamin C, Brussels sprouts and broccoli. Buckwheat also has a fair amount of ascorbic acid in it. Now the tocopherols, these are substances in foods related to vitamin E. So we have a number of vegetables and wheat and some other grains. Many of the cereals are high in tocopherols, and of course avocados and nuts are high in the tocopherols. This is just to name a few of these foods. Flavonoids, these are the berries. These are also things in the fruits, the seeded fruits like apples and citrus fruits, and broccoli as well. Onion is high in flavonoids. Onion is also high in quercetin, which is an antioxidant. Anthocyanins or anthocyanidins, these are also high in most of the berries, particularly in blueberries. And I recommend that you get some blueberry bushes and learn to grow these very nice berries. They're easy to grow, have no natural enemies, and they produce abundantly. Lignans present in flaxseed and in legumes, particularly soybeans and sesame seed. Indoles, these are nutrients that are present in broccoli and Brussels sprouts. And the isothiocyanates, they're also antioxidants, and they're present in radishes and turnips and others of that nature. So the time of the year can help you to concentrate on those foods that are going to be produced during that time of the year. Get some good books, learn to study these things, and make a good meal program for your family. Now, with all this talking about meals and foods, we want to discuss the quantity of food to eat at a meal. And Dr. Don Miller will be talking with you about that.
That's always a big question. How much food should I eat? And when I was in college, somebody was reading through a book, and they read me a little bit about this man by the name of Diamond Jim Brady. So I got on the internet the other day, and I looked him up, and I wrote down a little synopsis, or I had a little synopsis off the internet about the way Diamond Jim Brady would eat. And let me just read you his dietary, and we'll see how he got here. His day started off right, it says, a breakfast of eggs, pancakes, pork chops, cornbread, fried potatoes, hominy, muffins, and a beefsteak, and he washed it all down with a gallon of orange juice. For a midday snack, a mid-morning snack, he'd have a couple of dozen oysters or clams. A typical lunch consisted of 2 lobsters, deviled crabs, clams, oysters, and beef. He finished it up with some pies, not slices of pies, but whole pies, and then sometimes he would take, in the afternoon, he gobbled down a heaping platter of seafood. Well, those were his small meals of the day. Then it came time for supper. This was his normal supper. Now, he ate at a restaurant called Charles Rector's in New York City, and Mr. Rector considered Diamond Jim Brady his best 25 customers. So here's his usual evening meal. It began with an appetizer of 2 or 3 dozen oysters, 6 crabs, a few servings of green turtle soup. That's the appetizer. The main course was 2 whole ducks, 6 or 7 lobsters, a sirloin steak, 2 servings of terrapin, and a variety of vegetables. He did eat his vegetables anyway. He topped it off with a platter of pastries and often a 2-pound box of candy. He really liked the candy. And then he drank a lot of lemon juice along with this particular meal. So how did he know when he'd had enough to eat? Eating that much food, you would have think, how does he know when to stop if you're that far out of control? He had a very easy way of knowing when he had enough to eat. He'd sit down at the table, he'd pull his chair up, and he'd pull out a little measuring device, and he'd measure between his stomach and the table 5 inches. And he stopped eating when the stomach touched the table. So is that what you do? I'd have to be right up next to the table for me to do this. Now, the Bible has some examples of, or has a very good example of how much food we are to eat. We find this in the book of Exodus, the 16th chapter, the 16th verse. This is during the time of the manna raining down every morning except for the Sabbath. It says, "This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded." All right, here's the command of the Lord, how much to eat. "Gather of it every man according to his eating, 1 omer for every man." So you can eat an omer of food every day. So how much is an omer? Now, I've heard various things between 1 and 2 quarts of food. I had a friend one time who decided, he didn't know how much to eat, so he decided to do the omer thing. And so I think he had it down to 1 quart. So he'd come to breakfast, and he would have a little measuring device, and he would measure a 1/2 quart of food, and he'd eat his omer of breakfast. But he was still hungry. He was a big fella, so he borrowed a little bit of omer from lunch. And at lunchtime, he only had about 1/3 of an omer left, and he'd eat that, and he would still be very hungry, so he borrowed some omer from tomorrow morning's breakfast. And he'd eat that, and then the next morning breakfast, he was a little bit low, so he borrowed, and by the end of the week, he was so in debt with his omers, he just quit his program. So maybe that's not a good thing anymore, because this was perfect food that God had sent for the children of Israel. So how much should you and I eat? Some very simple rules of thumb. 1, we eat enough food to maintain a proper weight. We don't need any more than that. We should eat enough food so that we can leave the table still feeling like we could eat a little bit more, leaving the table just a little bit hungry. We should eat the amount of food that within 4 hours we feel as if it has completely left the stomach. Many people, after 4, 5, and 6 hours, feel like they're still carrying their meal, and they'll still eat another meal on top of this because they've eaten so much food, or foods that their body cannot take care of, that they're having a hard time getting rid of it. And so we need to make sure that we're eating the right amount of food at the right times, and those things are some really basic suggestions, Dr. Thrash, but I think they work for most people.
I'm amazed that anybody could eat the things that you have just read that Diamond Jim Brady ate. I'm certainly glad that I don't have to eat that much food. You'd have to spend almost all your time just eating. And life is composed of so many more things than that. How many items should you prepare in one meal? Generally speaking, it's 2 or 3 items for people who are fairly sedentary. And for those who are very active, you can add another dish. So it's from 2 to 4 dishes at a single meal. That with bread and spread should be plenty adequate for any kind of diet that you might like to plan for. Now, the state of mind that you're in when you eat should always be relaxed and cheerful, even if you're weighted down with a lot of cares from your business or from your ministry or from your schooling, whatever it may be that would weight you down with very heavy burdens. Lay those aside at the mealtime. If you need to, take a short walk and talk with our Savior and ask Him to give you freedom from care so that you can eat your meal without being burdened down with these cares. The temperature of the food that you eat should be not too hot nor too cold. Now let's say the meal is served to you either piping hot or icy cold. Then what can you do? Must you sit there and wait for 20 minutes or so until it cools or until it warms up? And the answer is no. We're quite able to handle that in the mouth. Take a small bite of something that isn't the proper temperature and let it stay in the mouth until it reaches the proper temperature for the stomach to be able to handle it. Bear in mind that with very cold things, cold slows down chemical processes in most instances, and the stomach being a chemical factory, it will slow down the processes that need to go on in the stomach. So adjust the temperature of your food before you swallow it. Now, what about food storage? Food storage is very important for the proper constituents of nutrients. You need to see that foods are not kept for long periods of time, especially once they've been prepared for the table. You can do some food storage, but bear in mind that as food is stored longer in the refrigerator, longer and longer periods of time will cause the food to accumulate nitrosamines, which are very potent cancer-producing agents. Then in the pantry, don't let things stay for years in your pantry, but keep things moving so that you're constantly moving those things that are the oldest toward the front, and don't overstock. That's the case with almost anything. If you buy large quantities of something, it tends to make you overeat, and it also tends to make the food get rancid or old before it's ready for you to eat it. Now, I hope these very simple things will help you to be able to plan your meals for the very best of health.